Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we have Varun. How you doing, man?
Not too bad. Thank you for having me here.
I'm very excited to have you on the show. I think this is going to be a really fun one. And before we jump into what we're going to be talking about, let's talk a little bit about you. Do you want to give us a background on yourself?
Sure. A longtime front-end developer. More recently, I've been working as a developer experience engineer over at Chromatic, and I also contribute to Storybook from time to time. So I tend to write a lot about Storybook these days. So you can find my stuff on the Storybook blog usually.
Very, very cool. Yeah. And so Storybook is something that honestly it became popular after I moved into mostly DevRel, which means that in my day job I haven't actually worked on a team that used Storybook. So all of my experience with it has been very kind of like high level. So for somebody like me who hasn't had a lot of Storybook experience but hears the name a lot, can you give me an overview, like what is Storybook and what value does it bring to a team?
Right. So Storybook primarily is a tool aimed at UI developers, so especially with using components to build UIs. One of the biggest challenges is a component has many different variations. So depending
Mm-hmm.
on sort of what props you pass in, it'll render different UI states or different sort of application states or interaction states that the user might have, or
Mm-hmm.
even things like uh, switching themes that your application might support. So when you're building the component in an application, it's really hard to sort of simulate all of that stuff. You have to drop in sort of temporary bits of data all over the place, and then once you're done, you delete it. And then whenever you come back to the component, you kind of have to redo all of that stuff over again.
Mm-hmm.
With Storybook, the sort of the magic sauce there is it just detaches the component from your application so you can work on it in isolation. And then stories are all of the different states of that component. So a story is simply you pass in a bunch of props that will go into the component, and you just document that as a story. So it's kind of like writing a snapshot test, but the
Mm.
difference is it actually renders that particular state in the browser, so you can go through all of the different component variations really really quickly, and you don't have to replicate them over and over again.
Nice, nice. Yeah. So this is it's really nice for me when I'm thinking about like I used to work in design systems back in the day, and one of the big challenges that we had is that it was really difficult to get some of those variations. And so
Right.
you would build a component and then you were kind of like, okay, am I really going to go through and edit like 50 files to get all these different variants to be like in place and shown? And of course you never did. So the docs were always out of sync with the code, and you ran into all these troubles around trying to demonstrate what was happening. And so I think the thing that is exciting about Storybook is it sounds like it's taken a lot of that I guess what I would call administrative work of like,
Right.
we made a change, go edit all the docs, and it's just making that part of something that happens through publishing code.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would
It
say.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, yeah, like with stories, that's kind of the starting point. You've done that work. You now have code that replicates all of those states for you and all of those examples, and then you can sort of generate documentation from that. That's like one aspect. Or if you want to write unit tests, you can just use
Mm.
stories as the starting point for a test, or if you want to do interaction tests, accessibility tests, stuff that we're going to talk about today. That stories act as the starting point for all of those other things too.
Yeah, yeah, and it gets towards something that I've talked about this with a handful of folks on the show, where we really are starting to see most of modern business is running on the web, where there are businesses that you just I have a lot of businesses that I have worked with and I've literally never done anything except use their website. Like I buy things through Amazon. I don't know that I have no interaction with Amazon outside of I go to the website and I click a button and then a box shows up in my door. A lot of like food delivery services, like you don't talk to people, you don't have a storefront, you open up the website and you make an order and it shows up at your house. And that's a growing amount of the web, and it kind of means that like the companies are putting all of their identity, all of their experience, all of the way people interact with their whole brand into the web. And when you think about how the web works, it's all driven by code. So, if you're trying to build a company and you don't treat code as the core building block of how everything works, you're creating indirection, right? And so that's a long way of saying that in modern businesses, code is the source of truth. So your design system should be code. Your the way that you build your components, it should live in code. Your documentation is probably going to be mostly code. Like all of these things that we're doing, the extra, like you should write extra docs. You should have design assets, but they should use code as the source of truth. And it sounds like this is sort of the same philosophy that Storybook has, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, exactly. It's really hard to keep documentation up to date if you're taking screenshots of the UI or if you're relying on Figma exports, because what's in Figma and what's in code, there's usually a delta in that. So yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
more you can use code to generate live examples or power everything, the closer you are to the actual truth of what's out there.
Yeah, and this is something that we're seeing kind of come up. It's not just in something like Storybook, where you have your component system is code that is a source of truth, which that one feels kind of obvious because the only other option would be that it lives in Figma, which would be hard because then every time the design changes, you got to go figure out what code changes to match that. But you've also got like the logic, right? Like instead of describing your logic in documentation, you can describe it as like a state machine. So for example,
Right.
David Khorshid has been on the show a couple times talking about state machines as, logic as code, the description of your business logic as code. We've also had, like, for example, the story to design, which is a pretty
Right.
cool thing, is letting Storybook generate your Figma. So now you can use Storybook as the source of truth for your design, like literally your design. You export your Storybook components into Figma. That's extremely cool. We had Tyson talking about that. And we're seeing more and more cases where that's the truth, where people are figuring out that ultimately at the end of the day, what moves a business forward is their code. And
Totally. Yeah.
if we use that as the core building block and then everything else kind of feeds back into it, we can all work more effectively together. And the caveat is that that doesn't mean that everybody in the company needs to be a developer. And I think that's why I'm so excited about some of these tools. Like with Storybook, you get a UI. I can go and look and click and say, oh, this is what we need. And I never have to look at the code. I can just say, hey, team, this is the thing that we want. Can we put that on the page? I can go play with a hero component or, a drop down or some kind of form element and say, like, can we do this one? I don't have to ever look at the code for it.
Absolutely. I mean, design systems are sort of like the starting point for a lot of people to use Storybook, but you get into your application and there's hundreds of other components in there
Mm,
that are not documented similarly. But if you have stories for them, designers can go in, check in the Storybook to see what patterns are already existing and then use them in their designs instead of sort of recreating that stuff from scratch.
absolutely. Yeah, just a huge amount of potential in this stuff. Like, and when we're really starting to think about how teams today have to work quickly, and every piece of friction in a handoff between teams just slows them down. So we see that small teams tend to move fast, but that's usually because those small teams do everything and there's no handoff points. So what makes bigger teams slow is that they have to get information across barriers. And
Right.
so tools like Storybook are how you break down those barriers. You no longer have a barrier because it's not like somebody has to sit down with you and do a training on how the design system works and explain all the variants and walk you through where to find stuff. You just go to Storybook, you look, it's there, you copy paste, and you're off on your business.
Totally. Totally.
It's really, really powerful stuff. So I get what got you into this area. Like, how did you find yourself getting into Storybook in general? Was there kind of an origin story?
I've always, well, I got into programming because of generative art. That's actually how I learned to
Mm,
code. Um, but realized that maybe that's not a sort of like great viable career in the long term. So building UIs was sort of like the next stop for me, where still get to do something visual with code. So it's kind of a natural fit. So I've always been in that sort of building UI space, and that sort of led into design systems, and Storybook was sort of the go-to tool for UI developers and design system developers. So that's where I've been using them for using Storybook for a long time. I used to work in consultancy where just got to sort of try out Storybook on a bunch of different projects with different sort of organizational constraints, and I always felt that it was a really good tool to sort of solve a lot of UI development problems and even sort of
Mm,
bridge the gap between developers and designers, because now there was an easy way to compare sort of what does a component look like in Figma and what does it look like in code without having to sort of fiddle with code. And that was a really sort of great starting point. Yeah, and
nice.
then that just sort of led to a point where I ended up meeting Dominic, who's one of the founders of Chromatic, and realized that there might be a good fit for me to come
That's
work with
great.
Chromatic.
Nice, nice. Well, cool. So let's see. So we're talking about specifically accessibility testing today, and this is something that it feels like there's really hot debate about accessibility in general, because there's, we've got the one camp that's completely wrong, that just says, oh, we don't worry about that because it's not the majority of our users. So we're going to immediately discount that camp because they're just
Totally.
absolutely incorrect. So then within it, you've got the subsets that are kind of, there's nuance, right? Because so much of this is experience, and experience is subjective. So should we be using ARIA labels? Should we be like, what should you announce when you have somebody moving around different things? How do you make certain interactions accessible that are kind of web native? They don't have standard patterns. What does all of that mean? And so when you get into accessibility testing, you've also got this idea of like automated testing. You've got tools like the Lighthouse Accessibility Audit. You've got DQs, Axe, and a few others in that camp that will give you sort of an accessibility score. But we've seen people kind of taking it to the extreme and saying, hey, I'm going to build the most inaccessible website I can and still get 100 score on Lighthouse. And so the automated testing isn't doing exactly what we need. So you still need some human testing. But like, how do you balance this in your mind when you're thinking about accessibility? How do you choose what to automatically test versus what do you manually test? And how do you sort of balance that process?
That's a great question. So I think there's like a lot of room for the automated tests. You're
Mm,
totally right. If you just rely on them, you can get 100 out of 100 scores and still ship something that is not usable for people anyway. Uh, but there's a ton of sort of low hanging fruit. Things
mm,
like, did I use the right color contrast? Do all of my inputs have a label associated with that? Are buttons properly labeled? Or if I'm using like an
right.
icon button, does it have an ARIA label to announce what the actual value is? Things like that, which you can totally do that manually, going through that over and over again. But that's the stuff that computers are really good at, right? They
Hmm.
they know that you can test color contrast, you can test for missing stuff. So that's where automation really helps, that you can do that sort of low hanging fruit stuff that is more grunt work out of the way, and then spend more time manually testing, like, does this interaction actually make sense? Like, if I go through this as a screen reader, does it actually display content in a way that I want it to, or is it just completely garbled stuff that just makes no sense to the user?
Gotcha. Yeah, and that makes sense, right? We have limited attention in a given day, and if we use all of it on stuff that is just a true false checklist,
Right.
then when you get to the more nuanced pieces, you just don't have as much brain space left, and you might cut corners, you might go fast. So if we let the robots do the checklist, and we instead do the more judgment call, like, okay, let me open this up and see how it feels on my keyboard, then
Right.
you can make better decisions and not have already been drained by doing the stuff that's really just, does this meet contrast?
Totally. Totally.
Gotcha. Now that makes sense. And a question for you, chat: how many of y'all are using automated accessibility testing in your work? And if you're using it, what are you using? What tools are you working with? So let's talk a little bit about how this works in Storybook. So when I think of Storybook, I traditionally have not thought of it as, you mentioned earlier, unit tests. I have not thought of Storybook as being something that is a testing it's not part of my testing consideration. I always thought that you kind of had like Storybook for exploration and documentation, and then you had like tests kind of off somewhere else. So how does testing fit into Storybook?
Yeah, so it's something that sort of the Storybook core team has invested a lot in the last year or two, I want to say.
Okay.
So accessibility testing was one of the first things that we rolled into into Storybook itself,
Okay.
because you're working on components in isolation, and I would say the go-to sort of accessibility testing tool is Deek's Axe. That's also what powers Lighthouse accessibility testing. So
Hmm.
you want to run Axe on your UI anyway, why don't you just run it in Storybook? And what Storybook does is it just gives you the report right there in Storybook. So as
Gotcha.
you're working on a component, it's just constantly running Axe in the background and telling you whether it found any issues or not. So
That's
that
cool.
that was kind of the starting point for testing in Storybook. And then now uh, there's something called play functions that you can attach to each story, which is just like a snippet of code that will be executed once the story is rendered.
Hmm.
And that's where you can actually write tests within Storybook itself. So you can use Jest and testing library to write an actual interaction test right in Storybook itself. Uh,
Oh,
or you can actually take stories and import them into other testing tools. So there are sort of utility libraries that called Storybook Testing React. Similarly, there's Testing Angular and Testing Vue, which allows you to sort of package up a story and just use that as in your, let's say if you're writing a Jest test, you can just use that as the thing that you render in the test
hmm.
and then run assertions on top of it. So there's it because you are, when you write a story, you're essentially isolating a component, you're giving it sort of mock data to set up a particular scenario,
Hmm.
which is like 2 out of the 3 steps in a test.
Right.
And the third part is running the assertions. So you can either run assertions within Storybook, depending on sort of what you want to do, or use another tool to sort of run that for you.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's a really good. I hadn't really thought of that before, but the what you do to set up Storybook is effectively the same thing you would do in any other testing setup, except for, as you said, the assertion. So that, that's a very logical step that I hadn't really considered. So that's very cool. Um, okay, so is there anything else that somebody should know before they get into actually doing this, or does it make sense for us to just flip over and start writing some code?
Yeah, we can jump into the code at this point.
All right, let's do it. Let's get into the code. So I'm going to flip us over into pair programming view here, and let's make this happen. So first and foremost, let me do a quick shout out to our captioning. We have Ashley with us today doing all the live captioning from White Coat Captioning. Thank you very much for being here. And that's made possible through our sponsors. We've got Netlify, NX, New Relic, all kicking in to make the show more accessible to more people, which I appreciate very, very much. And we are talking today to Varun. Make sure you go and give him a follow on the old Twitter. We're talking about Storybook, so here's a link to Storybook if you want to check that out. And you sent me a repo ahead of time here, which I'll drop a link to folks if you want to check out the code we're starting from. It's got Playwright in it, so I did the install ahead of time because it takes a couple minutes to get installed. But I have it here, I have it running, and I'm ready to go. What should I do first?
Cool. So this is a little sort of demo project. It has some sort of fake UI that I created, and I've already written stories for the components you see in here. So if you want to go through the code a little bit,
Sure.
everything lives in the source directory itself. Um, so you'll notice that there are a bunch of components in there, and I mostly used something called Chakra UI. You might have heard of it. Really, really
Yep.
good sort of UI toolkit to build out the UI. And you'll see most components have a .stories.js file that goes along with that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where we actually write out the stories. So it's a pretty standard Storybook setup, I want to say. Obviously using React, it's just a CRA project here. So to get Storybook running, all you have to do is go back to the terminal and just run yarn Storybook.
Okay.
So that's just going to start up the Storybook server with which will serve the Storybook UI.
All right. So here is our Storybook.
So if you go all the way down under pages, you'll see there's a dashboard screen. So that's the sort of the whole sort of page that we're going to be looking at today.
Oh, gotcha.
It's just a fake UI for sort of like admin UI for the Storybook Showcase, which is where we display components from sort of all the different storybooks that we've people submit to us.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty straightforward. There's a sort of a navigation up top, a form on the page, I think, and then like some stats.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do is, and this is sort of the story for the whole page itself, and the ones above this is sort of each component that's used to build up the page. So there are individual stories for those components. So if you go into the add project, for example, that is the little form. So this is where you can submit a URL to import Storybook, and these are sort of the different states. There's the default state. You try to submit something and it's incorrect URL, and then you submitted something and it's successfully submitted. So stuff like that. And then similarly, if you sort of go through the other components, there are stories for those components too.
Mm-hmm.
Footer, not really doing much, so just sort of one story. Same thing with the glossary. It just sort of renders whichever option you select. And then same thing with the rest of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, and so this is cool too, because it sort of shows like these are the atomic components, and then this is how, you know, it would be suggested to put those together, which
Totally.
is also helpful, you know, for me, for example. A lot of times when I look at something in isolation, I'm like, okay, this is cool, but like, how would this be used? Because there's also the context. Like you can see something and see what it's for, but without any context, I might imagine it as being something completely different. You know, I might come and look at this ad project, and, you know, I might be thinking about like, oh, enter the URL for the storybook. So this is for me to build a dashboard of like links to my storybook projects.
Right.
But I could be wrong. Like maybe it's something totally different. Maybe this is going to add all of my components to the left-hand side, or something, you know, something that's like totally logical, but not the way I thought about it. So seeing it in a broader context to help me understand how something should be used. Yeah, so that's great. Okay, I got it. I'm in.
Cool. So the main primary tools that we're going to be using today is a Storybook add-on called Accessibility.
Okay.
So Storybook by itself has sort of a core set of feature set, but there's a whole sort of add-on ecosystem for Storybook that allows you to extend functionality and add in sort of more capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we're going to do is set up that add-on. So I have already installed the add-on in this repo, so you don't have to run yarn install for it. If you go into the package JSON, you'll see there is a at storybook /add-on /a11y. That's
Mm-hmm.
the add-on we're going to be using. So what we need to do is we actually need to enable that add-on within our Storybook.
Okay.
So in your project, the root directory, there is a .storybook folder right at the top. And then within that, there is a main.js file. That's where the Storybook configuration lives.
Okay.
So in here, you'll see there's an add-ons array, and we'll just add on the ally add-on in there.
Okay. Okay.
And I believe you're just going to have to stop and start the Storybook command once more.
Okay. So we have updated the add-on, and all I've done is add this one line. So I haven't made any other code changes yet. We're restarting, and here we go.
Cool. So now you'll notice that there's this accessibility panel that popped up at the bottom.
Oh.
So that's what the add-on gives you. So what it's doing is it's running Axe on whatever is rendered within the story right now, and then it's giving you the report from Axe. So you can see that there's one error that's found,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll notice that there's a little checkbox there up where it says chakra button on the right-hand side. There's a little
I
checkbox
gotcha.
there. If you toggle that on, it actually highlights the DOM node that's causing the issue.
Ooh, that's handy.
So yeah, I mean, you get if you run Axe sort of on the CLI, it yells at you that something is off in color contrast in one of the UI components, and it's really hard to sort of go parse the little sort of HTML snippet it gives you to figure out what's causing that issue.
Mm-hmm.
With this, because you're running the code, you can actually just go highlight stuff that has any issues.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. So like looking at this, I'm now looking at the full dashboard, and I checked the highlight results, and I can see, oh, we got an issue here, we got an issue here, we got an issue here, issue here. Like, this is great. This is really fantastic because it very quickly shows me where to pay attention. Okay, so now I can say, all right, I want to look in the footer. So I'm going to go in here, and now I've got one violation I need to solve.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
So in this case, what it's yelling at you about is that these links don't actually have any text associated with them. So for users who can see, they can see that that icon is a GitHub icon, but it doesn't actually have the icon doesn't actually tell you that it's supposed to read out GitHub to a screen reader. So that's what it's complaining about. And yeah, that's the component right there. You can see that the icon button is simply rendering an icon. It doesn't have a label associated with that. So this is let's actually try to fix that. So a good way to do that would be to add in an ARIA label. So if you do ARIA label,
dang, this has
Twitter
a lot
for the first one.
Yeah, let me do this. Sorry. It's like, is it going to autocomplete for me? Let's see, first one is LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yeah.
And then
I think in React, you can do ARIA label as just an attribute. You don't need to do camel case. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Let's try it and see if it fixes it. Links must have discernible text. Is it yelling at me about all of these?
Did you save the component? Oh, sorry, did you save the file?
I did save the file. Let's check if that actually did what I thought it would do. I will inspect here. We've got...
Yeah, I see it there. Yeah.
We've got our ARIA label. Does it need to be on the icon?
Oh, you're right. Yes, it needs to be on the anchor tag, which is the button that's wrapping it. Or actually, no, you have it in the right place. That's fine.
Okay. Maybe if we add it to the other ones, like, is it just getting all of them because they're here?
Possibly.
Let's see. Here's our Twitter. Now, are you happy? No accessibility violations found.
The highlight is just sort of like left toggled on from previously, because if you go into the passes tab.
Okay, so that's actually okay. So now it's gone because I highlighted. Is there another? If I delete this one, then does it come back? Let's get out of here. Let's try this one more time. Now you're gonna yell at me.
Yes.
One violation, and it's just the one. Okay, so that's what it is. So if I put this back in, it'll keep it even though there's no violation until you reload just from the highlights. Got it.
And the reason for that is you'll notice that there's sort of 3 tabs within the accessibility panel: violations, passes, and incomplete. So you can highlight stuff that passes to. So
cool.
Depending on sort of, it's also sort of a good way to realize sort of what other checks are you running on this particular component that are sort of useful in this case, right? So you can sort of keep that in mind for future when you're doing something.
That's great. Very great. Okay. So we fixed one.
Yep.
All right. And now color contrast, again, it's here.
Yes.
So then I can go into the add project.
Totally. So this is sort of like an interesting one where like Chakra is a fairly accessible UI library, but you can still sort of like put in color combinations that are not accessible or don't have enough color contrast. So what's happening here is there is the sort of button that you see here right now. It's the color scheme is set to blue, so the default sort of white on blue is not high enough a contrast. So you can change that to I have another color scheme set up here called brand. So if you change the blue to brand, you'll notice that it should now go away.
Okay. And where does one set those things?
That's a great question. So back in your code, there should be like a theme.js file.
Theme.js. Aha. Yes. Brand.
Yes. So this is just you can extend the base Chakra theme to add in your brand theme, for example, and it just the usual sort of like 50 to 900 sort of color levels, and that's what it's picking up now.
Got it. Cool. So now we've got so what the button is picking one of these colors, presumably around the like this range.
Yeah, I think it probably defaults to 500 as the because it there you'll notice that there's like a hover style and an active style and things like that. So it just uses the scale to pick the darker color and the sort of the default color.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. This makes sense. Oh, and what's up? We got a couple folks showing up. Thank you for the sub, Michael, at a year. Thank you very much. Icon button doesn't get the extra. Oh yeah, we got it all. That was me not paying attention to chat. Thank you for all of the suggestions as we were struggling through that problem. Okay. So, and it turns out I figured out as well, and I think you were trying to tell me this, Varun, if you toggle between the passes and violations, it clears up those as well without having to reload the page.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was also very nice. Let's see, one violation. Okay, so now
so this is the text, the sort of like the error message there. The red on white isn't high enough sort of color contrast there.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So we can hop in here and look again at our ad project. And
so that's this text right there that you see. So in this case, because it's just setting a color, not a color scheme, you can choose like specific versions of the color.
okay.
So if we wanted to go slightly darker, we could do like a red 600, let's say, red dot 600. So it will be a slightly darker shade of red, and that should work then.
There it goes.
And again, so it went away.
Yep. Go over to the passes, come back, and the highlight is gone. And there we go. Now we've got a slightly darker shade of red. It passes accessibility. This is great. So this is like, and the interactions. This is the part you were talking about where we're actually kind of scripting, like it submits something bad and gets the failure.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll talk more about that shortly too.
Okay.
But yeah, generally this is sort of the flow. You're working on a component. It's running acts behind the scenes. You're getting the report, and you can fix stuff as you go.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the primary sort of features of what the accessibility add-on does. But I want to show one more thing. So
yeah, please.
Up top on the toolbar, you'll notice that there's that little accessibility icon. So if you click on that, this is sort of the other feature set, which is probably more for sort of designers, where you want to simulate sort of different vision defects that a user could have. So blurry vision or like different sort of color blindness. So you can use that as a way to check whether the color contrast makes sense, or like does the text that is supposed to look slightly different, like the red text, actually stand out from the default text or not. So things like that, you can test that here. So that's the other sort of feature that the add-on brings in.
Yeah, this is cool. And so this is like any form, because like color blindness isn't just a on off. There's a whole spectrum of like, because we've got the cones in our eyes, and that's why we can see colors. And so you can have different combinations of the cones not playing nicely with your eyeballs. And that totally is a little bit of medical info with Dr. Jason today. I have no idea what I'm talking about. That's just a thing I read once in a brochure. But no, this is like really, this is handy too. Cause this is actually something that I know affects people for real, but it's also a design trick that I was taught when I was like early in my career, is to kind of like squint at your designs until your vision blurs, because it'll show you what's taking visual precedence. So if we go look at the dashboard, for example, and we've got things blurred, you can, this is clearly the thing that people are going to read first, and then this will be what they read next, and they'll see these numbers. And like blur is a very useful tool for understanding visual hierarchy. And it's also very nice to see, like, okay, if your vision is low, like you can't really read that. You're not going to be able to read the footer at all, right? And so making sure that you've got, like here, I bet that's an accessibility problem, because that's definitely like really hard to read with blurry vision. So this alone, like even if you weren't thinking about it for folks whose vision is just like that, you can use this as a tool to understand like, oh, I made all the text too small. Like if I'm in bad lighting, I'm not going to be able to see this. If anybody is not wearing their glasses today, they're not going to be able to see this. So those are really, I love that. That's a super handy tool.
That's a great tip about the blurry stuff. For yeah, you're totally right. You can see like the button stands out compared to everything else around it. Cool. So this is sort of like the dev workflow. You're jamming out components, and you want to just make sure that things are the way you expect them to. Now, the other bit is sort of like you're ready to merge your code, and you just want to run accessibility tests on all of your components at once, because right now you kind of have to go through them one by one to go through stuff. So for that, we're going to use the Storybook test runner, and that's the sort of that's the interactions panel that you see there is powered by the test runner. So in this story, we don't have any interactions. The add project is the only one where we actually have interactions. So if we go back into the URL validation error, so here you can see what exactly is happening. So it's starting off by looking for a particular input here. So input that has URL as the label, and then it's sending a type event. So it's actually typing in my -storybook into that. So this under the hood is powered by testing library. It is a testing library and Jest, I should say. So two pretty standard tools. I feel like everyone loves testing library. It's a really, really nice library to use. Amazing developer experience. And also it is a library that actually tells you how to actually takes a more user-centric approach, I want to say. And when I say user-centric, I mean like the end user. So it tells you to find stuff the way that a user would, finding it through accessibility labels. So it actually works really well for the accessibility testing side of things too.
Okay.
So what's happening here is we're using variations of Jest and testing library that have been instrumented so that they can, one, run in the browser, and secondly, they can then be sort of debugged better within Storybook itself. So there is an @storybook/Jest package and an @storybook/testing library package that is again sort of pre-installed already within this repo. So that's what you can use, and you can use utilities from them to write out the actual interaction bit.
Okay.
So if you go into the add project stories file, we can walk through one of these play functions.
Okay. So I see here
top,
we're pulling in the testing library and Jest, and we've got an assertion, and then I see the user event within. We'll have to look at what that does. Okay. So I've got my template. Right.
So template is the sort of the template for the story that we're using for all of the stories. So the default use case, not really doing anything to it. And then for the URL validation error use case, we're actually trying to simulate an error scenario. So what you do is to the story, you attach a play function. And this is an asynchronous function. So again, testing library has some synchronous operations, but primarily it's asynchronous operations. So you can just use the async await pattern within this play function. And the play function receives the canvas element. So this is the container for the story, the actual DOM node that has the story rendering inside it.
And so that's basically this here.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So what you can do is you can actually, within a function from testing library is really cool. It allows you to scope all of your queries within a particular DOM node, so it makes it much easier to find stuff.
Oh, nice. Okay, so that makes sense. So then you're no longer like having to do okay, we've got a dashboard, and then within the dashboard I got to find all these pieces, and then there's the chance that like an outer container changes, and really your test is unaffected, but because the outer container changed, everything breaks. Exactly. So by scoping within this, that's nice. That is really nice.
Right. And then the rest is just a standard test that you would write in Jest and testing library. So, you're finding the URL input. You're first of all expecting that it is actually set to be required. So you have to provide it with a value, sending in whatever text you want to type in, and then sort of blurring out of it to trigger interactions, trigger validations. And that's then what triggers the validation error. So you could also add another sort of assertion at the end to assert what the validation error is that you want to see, or in this case, we're just sort of using that to simulate a particular state in the story, and that's totally fine too. So
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of one of the primary cases of the Storybook test runner. And again, these interactions are running as you're going through different stories. So if you go back to your terminal, what you can do is while Storybook is running in one terminal window, you can open up another window and run yarn test Storybook
Okay, and it is yarn test
dash Storybook.
dash storybook.
So now this is starting up the actual test runner. And the test runner, what it does is it converts all of your stories into tests. So stories that have a
Okay.
play function, it's going to make sure that the play function fired correctly and all of the assertions are passing. And the
Okay.
stories that don't have a play function, it's just simply making sure that the story rendered without any errors. So essentially now
Right.
you have tests for all of your stories. And this under the hood is powered by Playwright, which is why you had to wait a little bit for that initial yarn install.
Mm-hmm.
So because we have this testing set up, we can actually use this to run Axe 2 on all of our stories. So that's what we're going to do next.
Love it. Okay. Yeah. I'm into it. How does one do such a thing? Do I start in the same stories folder?
So to run Axe with Playwright, we're going to use something called Axe Playwright, another sort of wrapper library around Axe.
Okay.
Again, I believe that's already been installed, so it should be in the package.json. Yeah, great.
Okay.
So we're now going to set up the Storybook test runner to run Axe. So along with running those sort of play function based tests, you can extend the test runner using something called test hooks.
Sorry, give me one sec. I just realized we didn't actually
Yeah.
link to this tool. So this is what we're talking about. It's accessibility testing, and that is something you can throw into all your projects. So okay, so now that we've got that, you said to do something, and I was trying to find the website and not paying attention. Sorry.
No worries. So by default, the test runner will sort of run those play function tests,
Right.
but we can also sort of extend it and get it to add more functionality to it through a hooks API.
Okay.
And these are not React hooks; it's just simply sort of hooks into the test runner. So we're going to set that up, and we need to sort of configure them. So we'll go back into the .storybook folder
Okay.
and add in a new file called testrunner.js. So test-runner.js.
Okay.
So this is where we will sort of define the test hook. So, but the test hook is simply you do sort of a module exports, and it's an object that has a couple of properties. So the first one is a pre-render function, and the second one is a post-render function. And pre-render in sort of camel case.
Okay.
Cool. So to run Axe, what we're going to do is pre-render is simply before the story has been rendered, do something. Post-render, after the story has been rendered, will do something.
Okay.
Cool. So the process for running Axe is before the story is rendered, you need to inject Axe onto the page. And after the story is rendered, we're going to actually run the Axe checks.
Okay, so first we want to inject it, and then so we do that before we start rendering anything on the page. And then this is after the components are up, the canvas is loaded, JavaScript is completed, we are ready to like use this UI, then we can do some stuff. And that makes sense because obviously if we try to run a test before the UI is finished rendering, everything's going to explode. So that all makes sense. So to inject Axe, we've got Axe Playwright.
Yes.
So do I just need to inject or import something up here?
Yeah. So depending on what version of Node you're using, you might be able to use import statements, or just you can stick to require statements. So yeah, so we're going to require Axe Playwright, and then you can sort of destructure the require there. And the two things that we need are inject Axe and check ally. There you
Okay.
go. Yeah. So the first step,
Is
we
it
just run
really just
inject
that?
X. So the pre-render and post-render functions, they receive a page object. So we do need to sort of grab that page object as the first param and pass that into the inject X function.
Okay.
And the second thing is these are all async operations. So we need to make these async functions, and then I'll wait for the inject X function there.
Okay.
Cool. That's all for the pre-render stuff. For the post-render stuff, we're going to do kind of the same, similar sort of pattern. You get the page object as the first param, and we pass that into the check ally function.
Like that?
Yeah, that's it. So that should work.
Is that that's the whole thing?
That's the whole thing.
Oh, I love it when it's simple.
Almost. So I should just point out one thing. So
Sure.
by default, Axe is set up to run on an entire page, which makes sense because you like when you're running Axe through Lighthouse, you're running it on an entire page.
Right.
So it's going to check for stuff like, do you have an H1? Do you have a main tag defined? And things like
that's true. Yeah, yeah. And with Storybook, that doesn't make sense because we're rendering a single component. So, like, of course, we don't have an H1 in most of these, and that failure would be kind of a false positive.
Exactly. So,
okay.
With the check ally function, you can configure it a little bit to just sort of tweak it to run it on a particular sort of component. And actually, there's a really good question in chat right now around. So
yes.
Why would I use Axe Playwright over just Axe? So good question. The reason we're using Axe Playwright here is because the test runner runs on Playwright. So you have to use something that runs on Playwright. If you were running just test, then yeah, totally you would use just Axe. But in this case, because we're running a test on Playwright, we have to use sort of the Playwright flavor of it.
Got it. So we could, like, test runner is the way that this works. Like in Storybook, I name something with the file, like or with the plugin, and I can extend. Right. Okay. So if we were going to use
depends on the add-on a little bit. Yeah.
So if we weren't using test runner and we were instead only using Jest for like unit test assertions, we could use Jest Axe instead.
You could, but in that case, you would be importing stories into Jest, which is a slightly different pattern and also a totally valid pattern.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, so with this check ally, we're passing it in the page, but our page is not complete, so we need to tell Axe that it's a fragment, right? Or is it what's the terminology here?
I think it's just you tell it that you're testing a DOM node, and then it just like enables a few things. So all you need to do is the second param is what is the element that you want to target. So in this case, we can just do pass in a string with the value #root. So that's the selector for the root element within a story. So that's what we're telling.
Okay.
And then also lastly, there's sort of a third parameter which we can use to sort of configure sort of how we want to generate, what kind of report we want to get from Axe. So let's enable a couple of options. The first one is detailed report. So we will set that to true.
Okay.
And the second one is detailed report options. Now this is going to be an object, and we'll just set HTML to true. So what's happening here is when test runner runs now, detailed report true means that it's going to give you sort of a table which tells you, similar to sort of the stuff we got within the Storybook UI, you'll get sort of like a check of like what checks passed on what particular DOM node. And then HTML true will actually give you a snippet of the HTML code if something failed. So that's all we're doing here.
Okay. And so this should be interesting because we know, like, we set up the accessibility plugin for Storybook, and when we open Storybook, so if I go back out to the actual code and I look at my dashboard, I can see that I do have problems. But when we ran the test passed because we weren't running accessibility checks as part of our testing. So this would be confusing, right? Like if we don't want to send inaccessible code out, this would be it would just be wrong. Like our tests are lying to us. Our code is broken. We're not catching that. So what we've just done is we've said, okay, in addition to the other tests you're running, also run this accessibility test and include the report. So now what we should see is if I run it again, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if I run this test again, what we're going to see is that it is going to give us that the unit tests pass, but we're going to get an accessibility failure.
Totally. Yeah, we should definitely see those.
All right, let's roll. Okay, so here's our 6 tests. They are passing, probably. Oh, they didn't because the accessibility test went into... I understand. Okay, but yeah, check this out. So we do have tests passing, but then when we go up here, let me make this... Let's see. I don't think I'm going to be able to make this big enough to make...
Yeah, so that is the reason why we have the add-on, so you get sort of better debugging information within Storybook. But this is sort of the you want to run accessibility tests on CI kind of setup, so that's where this is useful.
Yeah, just trying to make this big enough that we can... There we go. So I hope that text is not too small for everybody to read. I just wanted this... I guess that's not going to help us because only some of these are going to be readable. But so we've got... Like in the stories, no default, no violations. And then in the, is this the...
So it's one of the stories that has an issue. So these are for the color contrast for one of the stories is failing. That's what it's complaining about there.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And then we've got like in the submit success. So in add project submit success, we get a violation, and that's what this one is up here. The violation up here is for the submit success. Is that correct?
I believe so. So it runs all of the tests, and then at the bottom is the summary for sort of that one component, because it has multiple stories. So it gives you sort of a summary for that one component.
Got it. Okay. And then down here, we've got like our dashboard smoke test. We have 3 accessibility violations. And if we look up here, we can see here's the actual logs. Got it.
Exactly.
I understand. Cool. So now we're actually getting failures, which is what we wanted. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger again so that we can actually see the text on the screen there. Oops. Come over here. There you are. All right. So now we can go in and we can fix these, and that'll clear up this test. And now our builds will fail when they should fail.
Yep.
Good.
Exactly. And so really the workflow here is, while you're working locally, you can just rely on the accessibility add-on to run those checks for you, so you don't have to worry about the test runner. But then because the test runner is set up, if you run those tests on CI, you're also running those checks across your entire Storybook. So you get the sort of the CI checks that are sort of helpful. So you kind of get it's kind of split between the two, where one is sort of more locally, the other is more for CI. So that's the core sort of automated accessibility testing workflow with Storybook. But I do want to sort of get into one more part, which is, and you sort of touched upon this earlier, which was we get the robots to do sort of the low-hanging checklist and give us sort of more time to do sort of the more qualitative analysis of the UI. So if you go back into the Storybook and just open up the submit failed story there for the add project. All right, so what's happening here is you try to submit the form, and there was some kind of validation error, and you see that validation error. If you pop open your DevTools, let's actually go inspect the UI and see whether, and for the time being, you can close that add-on panel. That's totally fine. And you can just select the little alert that you see down there. All right, cool. So in your DevTools, I believe you have the on the right-hand side where you see sort of styles, computed layout, there is an accessibility one. And if you don't mind, could you enable the full page accessibility tree? And you just have to reload DevTools now.
Like
the little blue button up top. Yeah, that works. Or the if you just
Oh,
hit the little
reload
blue
dev
button on
tools. I
top.
got it. I
Yeah,
missed that button entirely. Okay.
no worries.
So
So
let's
so
inspect again.
once,
Go to
and then you'll see that little
accessibility.
well, now you have that little accessibility icon on the left-hand side. If you enable that, so this is a really cool feature that
Oh.
sort of landed in Chrome recently. This just gives you the accessibility tree for your entire UI that's being rendered. So you can actually see you
Oh.
can go through and sort of explore everything
Yeah.
that you're seeing here. So if you that's the sort of static text that we're getting. So
Mm-hmm.
technically that is supposed to be an error message associated with the form element. But if you go sort of select the form element, you'll notice that they're not sort of associated with each other. And you can do the selective. Yeah, that totally works. So you can see that um, it has the sort of that's the sort of the text box that you're trying to edit. It doesn't have any kind of validation error associated with that, and
Right.
the alert is completely detached. So it doesn't tell you that this is the validation error that you encountered. And the reason for that is the the error message is just like a div that's rendering the error message underneath the input field.
Right.
When you want to display an error message connected to a form field, you usually use something called aria label described by, and then you associate the ID of the error message with the input.
Got it. Okay.
That
So
that's
then
that
I
that's how.
need to go to my ad project
Indeed.
and I
So
have my error message. And this is where I would, or wait, not aria described by. This would get the aria described by.
right. So the good news for us is Chakra actually does that stuff for you under
Oh,
the hood.
cool.
You just need to go make sure that you use the right components. So Chakra has a component called, I believe, form. Let's see. I think there might be an
Form
import up
error
top.
message.
Form error message. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
So what we can do is we can swap out the text with the form error message, and then under the hood, it just like knows to use assign it with an ID and then connect the input with the correct ARIA label described by and things like that. So now
Oh,
if
for
you
real? I don't have to associate it or anything?
no, nothing
That's
at all.
clever. Okay.
So now when it reloads, you should see that it's actually sort of tells you that that's it's sort of like uh, there's a validation error and it's associated with that particular component.
Where do I see that? Do I need to reload?
I I think if you just toggle away from the accessibility tree, let's just first make sure that so if you toggle that off, let's just make sure that it's getting the aria label stuff associated with it.
Here's my input. Aria required.
Right.
Let me reload. Aria required.
Oh,
Alert.
I think I know why.
Okay.
So right now it's sort of conditional. You don't need to do the conditional rendering anymore.
So just
So you can
delete
sort
it
of get rid of
altogether?
yeah, just the sort of the check there. You don't need that anymore. So
Okay.
it should work without that. And also on the form control, we need to sort of add in an is invalid state. So yeah, that's already there. So that's great. Cool.
Oh, got it. Okay. So then if we look at this again, div input, I still don't see any aria.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Let's try. Here's our alert. I'm gonna reload one more time just in case it's something with it not picking up for us.
What I was going to do next was we can actually write a test for it because testing library has a utility to do exactly that. So we can write a test that confirms whether it's working or not.
Okay. How does one do that?
So we'll go back into the stories file for that particular
Okay.
component. And in the stories file, oh, actually, you know what? I know exactly what the problem is. First of all, we're just in the wrong story.
Oh,
The issue is because that's the
we're
submit
in this
alert.
one.
So exactly that's the one we should have been looking at. So
Uh,
if you check now,
we have, let me get to the actual input.
I think if you expand the label text, I'm curious if that. But it is sort of now you can see that it's part of the group. So the static text that you see from the validation error is part of the sort of the input control group.
Mm-hmm.
And if you toggle back the sort of the regular HTML tree, I think you should see the ARIA label by stuff in there now. There you go.
ARIA
Actually, you can see
described
the
by.
ARIA described by.
Okay, so this was just good old fashioned. You're editing the wrong file.
Well, we were editing the right file. We were just looking at the wrong
Yeah.
story.
Okay, so this one would also be the error message. Is that right?
So that one is correct because that is an alert that you want to render on completion of the form.
Okay.
So that will get announced as an alert. So that part is correct. It's just the validation error that was incorrect.
Got it. So we did the right thing. We were looking at this submit failed, and we should have been looking at the URL validation. Got it.
Exactly.
Okay, I understand.
Exactly.
All right. So now how does one test such a thing? So I'm going to get into our stories, and
Yes.
I have this. So this is the validation. That's the one that needs the alert.
Yep. So in that one, so after the blur event, so that's what we're going to check. So the testing library has a really cool function called to have accessible description, where you can grab a DOM node and sort of check to see whether it has the correct description associated with that or not. So the first thing we want to do is just make sure that the input is set to be invalid. So we'll do expect URL input to be invalid. And this is a function that you have to call. So this is essentially just checking to see whether the sort of the input status has been set to invalid. So either using ARIA or just sort of normal DOM APIs. And then the second one is going to be expect URL input. And this is going to be to have accessible description. Not sure why that did autocomplete, but so this is where we expect that error message. So in our case, the error message is please enter a correctly formatted URL. So if you type in that, then the test should pass. If you type in something else, the test will fail. I don't think there's a period at the end, but
there's not.
The test, that's why the test should fail right now.
Actually, yeah, let's have it test. So break it to start.
So you don't need to run test storybook. You can just go into storybook and
oh wait, doesn't like
actually,
that.
Yeah. Just run the story. So refresh the page, or there's like little refresh icon that should work too.
Within is not a function. What did I break? Is it?
That is interesting.
Do we need to? We don't have to like extend this or anything, because this comes out of testing library, right?
Yeah,
or
yeah,
test,
that should be there.
This is jest, isn't it? So do we have to do anything to get these plugged together?
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's a good point. I think it does come out of jest, but I think you should be good to go. I don't think you need to do anything for that.
Okay.
Maybe just try refreshing the page.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
Let's try that. Turn it off and on again.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So if you open up the add-ons panel again, you can just hit A on your keyboard, or click that button there. Either works.
No, come back. A. I don't think that one's working for me.
The one on the far right-hand corner, the little icon there. If you click that, that should open it up. There you go.
Okay, there we go.
And the interactions panel, you should see the failing test.
Expect to be invalid. It is not currently invalid.
Okay. So that part does make sense to me. So what's happening here is I'm using Formic to handle the form submission and the validation logic in here.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges with Formic is it sort of pushes stuff to the next tick. So generally, when you're writing a test with Formic, you have to wait for things to complete before you can run those checks. So what we can do is those last 2 lines of code, we can actually wrap that in a wait for function from testing library, and you have to await that function. And
this is
you can use just an arrow function, which will wrap the next 2 expect statements.
Like so.
So now if you go back to the test, the first part should be correct, that it does set it to invalid.
Let's rerun. Expect it
so
to be
that
invalid.
First part is correct.
And now it's saying it doesn't have a correctly formatted URL. So I'll fix my text to match. Rerun. And now it's happy.
And there you go.
That's great.
So that's like a really good example of the sort of the more nuanced UI development, where you throw in a div there and Axe ran all the checks on it, everything was passing, but you weren't actually announcing any error messages. So it's really easy to miss that kind of stuff. So
really
that's
easy to miss.
Totally. So yeah, I think testing library is fantastic for some of that kind of stuff, where you can check to see whether alerts are being announced or things have the correct description, accessible description, not just sort of like visually what you can see.
Yeah. Well, this is a cool one too, because I didn't realize that testing this was that straightforward. I would have expected that we'd need to actually check for the ARIA labels, and you're digging into attributes and stuff. Is there a way that you can say, I really just want it to have an accessible description, I don't care about what the text is?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I feel like might have to sort of go into the Jest documentation to see if there's something like that.
That's okay. That can be a homework for anybody who's curious about these sorts of things. So Varun, what else do you want to look at here? What we got a little bit more time.
To be honest, like that was like everything I wanted to show you. I'm not sure if you had any questions or anything else you wanted to dive into.
Chat, how about y'all ask any questions that you've got? If we don't get any questions, we're going to call this one a success. Varun, while we're waiting for folks to think about their questions, where else should people go if they want to do more on their own? So I'm going to drop the Storybook link again. What else should people look at?
So up top there, you see a tutorials link there. So in tutorials, the third one down, the UI testing handbook. So that's going to be my little plug here. It has it covers all the stuff that we talked about regarding accessibility testing, but it also goes into sort of other aspects of UI testing that you can do with Storybook. So things like visual regression testing, user flow testing, and then sort of like automating the whole thing with CI. So covers all that stuff. Really fantastic resource because I wrote it. So I'm gonna take be a little bit humble there, but yeah, I think it's useful.
No, I
see a question.
Yeah, there's a good question here about using this with other languages. So can you use Storybook with Angular?
Totally. So the nice thing is, under the hood, it's using testing library DOM. So it's not tied to any front-end framework. As long as you're using a framework that renders HTML, the whole sort of interaction testing stuff works. And then Storybook itself supports pretty much every single major front-end JavaScript framework. So React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, yeah, all those things work.
Nice. Are y'all working with any of the newfangled ones like Solid.js or Quick or any of those?
I believe there is sort of a solid JS integration in the works. It's not
Nice.
quite ready for prime time, but yeah, it's in the works for sure.
That's exciting. Let's see. Enjoy to Live says, is there anything I should be doing to make this work with Chromatic? And any examples if so?
Yeah, so I'll break that into two parts. The accessibility testing part, that is something that is coming to Chromatic. So for those who don't know, Chromatic is a visual regression testing service that's built on top of Storybook. So it takes a snapshot of all of your stories and then runs a visual diff between them. So the accessibility testing bit is going to come to Chromatic most likely early next year. So you don't have to do the test runner setup. It will just sort of do that part for you if you're using the accessibility add-on. But for the time being, you would have to use the test runner to run your tests in CI. But for the play function stuff, if you're using that, then they just work out of the box with Chromatic. So like, for example, those forum stories that we wrote where you click around and you fill out the form, Chromatic is going to wait for all of that stuff to happen before it takes the snapshot. So that stuff just kind of works.
Gotcha. And so the comparison then I guess would be like in any project, you're going to pay for it. So you can either choose to pay with time or you can pay with money. And so with Storybook, you can build all of the things here as your own kind of automated workflows, and you're paying with time. Or if you want to solve it with money, you can go over to Chromatic and it just works. And then you get to keep your time, but in just part with your money, which is, I mean, that is a very nuanced discussion that's worth probably a whole episode's worth of like just digging into the nuances of value and trade-offs. But that's super handy. Let's see. So JL is asking, does it work with different viewports?
It does. So both on the Storybook side and the Chromatic side. So if you go into Storybook, you'll notice that there's that icon there. Yep. If you toggle that, you can switch between different viewports. For our purposes, it's not really going to do anything here because the UI is pretty much the same. But if your UI shifts between different viewports, you can use that to run tests across the different viewports. And then the same thing for Chromatic. Chromatic does support different viewports, so you can run your visual tests across different sizes that you want to.
Nice. Cool.
And these viewports are configurable. So if you have like specific breakpoints that you use in your application, you can use that. These are just sort of the default set that it comes with.
Cool. All right. So Varun, I not seeing any more questions. I think I'm going to start doing the wrap up here. So I'm going to send everyone to your Twitter. We've got a whole bunch of different resources for folks who want to go and dig a little bit deeper. Do you have any parting words for the chat before we call this one a win?
No, this was great. Thank you again for having me here.
Yeah, I had an absolute blast. This was super fun. I'm really impressed with just how much we were able to do on the just on the work here. Source code, yes, I will post the source code. Actually, let me do that now while we're thinking about it. So what I will do is I've got this. I'm going to GitHub repo fork, and I'll put it up on the. Oh, you put it up? Yeah, fine. Yeah, we'll add a remote. Okay, and so now this is in the wrong repo, but that's a pain in my butt. Okay, so I'm going to git add everything that we did, and we'll git commit and say code after episode, and we will git push. No, git push origin main. Okay, and then we can GitHub, actually, we'll just grab this, go out here, do one of these, and this is the code that we actually built today. So if anybody wants to see that, we'll make sure that shows up in the show notes as well. Cool. All right. So this episode, like every episode, has been live captioned. We've had Ashley here from White Coat Captioning all day. Thank you very much for that. That's made possible through the support of our sponsors, Storybook, NX, and New Relic, and maybe your company. Hit me up if you are looking to sponsor a stream. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up on the schedule. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. Next week, we are going to find out what's new in Astro V1. They are going 1.0 stable. Super excited about that. Fred's coming back to teach us how that works. And then we're going to have Adam Argyle teaching us how CSS open props work, which is really cool. Open props is like, it's sort of like Tailwind, but if it was built entirely in CSS, and I find that very exciting. So Adam is going to come teach us how that works, and we're going to build a UI with it. Then we got Will coming back, and I've got another like 4 or 5 episodes in my inbox that I really, really need to get on the site, so stay tuned for those. Varun, this has been a blast. Chat, as always, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We're going to go find someone to raid, and we will see you all next time.